Numbers are thrown out all the time.
Are they proof of some truth or just fluff that bluffs us? These statistics need some serious looking into. I'm Brendan Fernandez, and that's what I'll do, because some numbers are just worth figuring out. On the season finale of It Figures, baby fever, or rather the lack of it. Singapore has been sorely neglected by the stork, and we're asking why. Our total fertility rate has been creeping down for the past 10 years. And if you think that's just a side effect of our economic success, well, you're half right. And we're crunching the numbers to find out, does it really cost a bomb to bring up baby?
This sculpture by British artist Mark Quinn weighs 7 tons. An unintentional reflection of the way some Singaporeans feel about having children these days. That it's a heavy responsibility. Our total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman will have in her lifetime, has remained below 1.3 for the past 10 years. Now that's a pretty dismal number by any measure, but especially so for a country which is, ironically, one of the best places in the world to be a mother.
Where is the best place to be a mother? Every year, leading American non-profit Save the Children answers that question by ranking countries based on the well-being of both mothers and children. So where was the best country to be a mother in 2012? Finland. The worst, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And how did we do? Singapore placed 15th on the index. It was the highest ranking Asian country, ahead of even the United Kingdom and the United States.
Singapore did very well in the index, but our total fertility rate is quite low. How do we make sense of that?
Well, if you look at other countries who've gone through their own developments and over the decades have grown more economically strong, you see similar case here in Singapore. You have right now a highly educated populace in general. Women are doing quite well in terms of attaining higher levels of education. Economic well-being, economic status of the country is very strong. So in the decision-making process on their own as individuals or in the family context, there are more things that they can do, more opportunities to try new things.
Save the Children's The Mothers Index ranks countries using 5 indicators. The lifetime risk of maternal death as a measure of mother's health. The under 5 mortality rate as a measure of a child's well-being. Expected years of formal schooling as a measure of the access to education. Gross national income per capita as a measure of a mother's access to economic resources. And finally, participation of women in national government as a measure of access to the political process. So how did Singapore fare? In Singapore, only 1 in 25,300 women is likely to die due to pregnancy-related causes. That's one of the lowest rates in the world. Our under 5 mortality rate of 2.6 is the 4th lowest in the world. Our children can expect to spend 14.4 years in school. The average income of a Singapore citizen is $42,930 per annum. And women occupy about 2 out of 10 seats in Parliament.
Why did Singapore do so well in the index?
If you look at the index, there's the under 5 child age mortality, there's the lifetime risk of maternal death indicators. And both of those for Singapore are very low. So that has a big impact when you take 2 out of the 5 indicators used to make this composite ranking and putting together the index.
So we did best in terms of the health of the mother and the child. In fact, in terms of healthcare, Singapore is ranked 6th in the world, according to the World Health Organization. So why aren't Singaporeans jumping on the baby bandwagon? And are we alone in our reluctance?
It is lower than most countries of Europe, Some of the countries of Europe went to very low levels and they've tended to rise a bit again, and at this point there are very few countries of Europe that are as low as Singapore.
2011 is the last available year for comparison of TFR across all countries. Between 2002 and 2011, the average TFR of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD countries, actually went up from 1.6 to 1.74. In Iceland, the TFR went up by 3.62% between 2002 and 2011. France's TFR went up from 1.9 to 2.0 in this 10-year period, a 5.2% shift upwards. In Switzerland, the hike in TFR was 7.1% between 2002 and 2011. In the United Kingdom, the TFR went up in the 10 years between 2002 and 2011 by 11.7%, a much higher jump compared to the increase in the OECD average. For Sweden, the 10-year change in the TFR was even higher, 26.6% to be exact.
Well, there are probably two reasons for that. One is a sort of technical reason that people had been postponing having children that they eventually wanted to have, and then they stopped postponing having them, and that means that the measured fertility rates go up, even though people are, in a way, they're not having more children, but they're changing the timing of them. So that was one factor which pushed up fertility rates in recent years. But the other factor is probably policy impacts in some places. There has been better attention to things like childcare and free childcare, that sort of thing.
In Europe, the rebound in the total fertility rate has actually been positively correlated with the increase in the female labor force participation rate. Simply put, the more women who are working, the higher the total fertility rate of the country. In France and in the UK, 5 in 10 women work. In Sweden and Switzerland, 6 in 10 women work. In Iceland, this number goes up to 7 in 10. What about Singapore? Our female labor participation rate is 57.7%. So, about 6 in 10 women are economically active. Yet between 2002 and 2011, Singapore's TFR declined by 14.28%.
I think in Singapore, women still do find it quite difficult because of aspects of the culture to combine the work with the childbearing. They would like to be doing both, but being in the workforce, they find that it's not so easy. It's partly, perhaps it's a lack of support in a way by the husband at home in doing enough of the housekeeping and child rearing even when both are working.
One study done at Dartmouth College in the US in 2008 divides the relationship between the female labor force participation rate and the total fertility rate into 3 phases.
In the earliest phase, like most of the developed world in the 1940s and 50s, there were so few opportunities for women in the workforce, it made more sense for them to focus on the family. The outcome? Higher fertility rates. In the intermediate phase, women have much bigger opportunities in the labor force, but they're still expected to do the bulk of the work at home as well. So the opportunity cost of having kids is much higher, resulting in lower total fertility rates. And in the final phase, there are even higher labor market opportunities for women. But what's different as well is the more egalitarian distribution of household duties. The outcome? Female labor force participation rate becomes positively correlated with the TFR, as in the Scandinavian countries in the recent decade.
So, which phase is Singapore in? The intermediate phase, where women have the biggest disincentives for having children. Depending on what phase it's in, the female labor force participation rate can affect the total fertility rate of a country. Now, Singapore is in the intermediate phase, where for women in the workforce, the opportunity cost of raising a child is high.
The number of women in the workforce generally goes up as more women become educated. So how has the education level of Singaporean women changed over the years? Let's look at how much time a woman in Singapore spends in school, on average.
On the horizontal, the years since 1990. On the vertical, the average number of years a female resident in Singapore aged 25 and above has spent in school. This is what it looks like. The number went up from 5.9 in 1990 to 9.7 in 2011. That's a jump of over 64%. Now, if we were to show you the total fertility rates over the same period, the number of children born to university-educated women fell from 2.0 to 1.77. That's a drop of about 11.5%. So, what does that mean? More education for women, fewer babies? Career and child. These days, women want both. That's according to a 2012 study done by Singapore's National Population and Talent Division. Over 4,600 people were surveyed. 80% of the single women wanted to be working mothers, and 77% of the married women wanted to continue working after having their first child.
If you look at the Scandinavian data, you would find that I suspect, for many women, for the female labor force participation rate, it's boosted by part-time involvement of women who are also looking after young children. I suppose if you compare the Singapore benefits, pro-family benefits, with Scandinavia, one might argue that, especially when it comes to leave, right, the Scandinavia system seems more generous.
The other difference between us and the OECD countries is that childbearing rarely happens outside of marriage. And marriage in Singapore is being put off by both sexes.
Let's look at the median age of marriage for Singaporean men. That means if we were to line up all the married men in one line according to age, this would be the age of the guy standing in the middle. On the vertical, the median ages. The median age of marriage for men in 1990 was 28. For women, 25. By 2012, this had changed to men, 30, women, 28. How about the median age of mothers when they have their first child? In 1990, the median age of mothers at the birth of their first child was 27.5. In 2012, a Singaporean woman was most likely to have her first child at almost 30.
Delaying the decision to have a child can result in the decision being taken out of your hands. Age is the single biggest factor in determining fertility. While there certainly is a decline in male fertility with age, there does not seem to be an absolute age beyond which a man could not father a child. So the ability for a couple to have a child tends to have a lot more to do with the woman.
On the horizontal, a woman's age. On the vertical, the likelihood of pregnancy for a typical woman in good health. According to a study done in 2002, when a woman is between 20 and 24 years old, she has an 86% chance of getting pregnant. This goes down to 78% when she moves into the next age bracket, 25 to 29. By the time she reaches her mid-30s, 35 to 39, her chance of getting pregnant is only 50%. The fall in fertility is steep post-35. There's only a 36% chance of pregnancy when she's nearing 40, and 0% at age 50. But Singaporeans don't seem to know this. According to a government survey, 70% of single and 77% of married respondents assume that couples would have no problems conceiving even after age 35.
A misconception that the government has been trying to dispel with guerrilla campaigns such as these. modern-day fairy tales. Because if couples think assisted reproductive technology is the answer, well, that isn't always the case. One of Singapore's largest infertility centers, the KK Women's and Children's Hospital IVF Center, tells us that a woman below the age of 30 has about a 1 in 2 or 51% chance of getting pregnant through IVF. That drops to 40% when she reaches the ages of 30 to 39. And drops again to 15% when she reaches 40.
But biology seems to be a secondary consideration to economics. According to the government survey, the top reason cited for not having more kids or any kids at all was financial cost. So, what is the price on parenthood in Singapore?
There is no official estimate on the cost of raising a child in Singapore. But in 2010, a local newspaper worked out what it would cost to raise a child from infancy through to university. Cost was divided into 5 categories, with a lower end and a higher end estimate for each category. For pregnancy and delivery, parents can expect to spend between 4,000 and 20,000 Singapore dollars. This includes hospital fees, maternity wear, baby accessories, and so on. Between 2 and 18 months, for things like daycare, vaccinations, diapers, etc., parents can expect to spend between $20,000 and $30,400. From 18 months to 7 years old, that's the price tag. On pre-university education, the low estimate, $40,000. The high estimate, $70,000. And finally, a university education could cost you between $100,000 and $500,000. So, taking the average spend in each category, the estimated cost of raising one child would be about 500,000 Singapore dollars. In February 2013, another dollar tag on child raising was talked about in the news. Joseph Chong, a former CEO of a financial advisory firm, estimated that the total cost of raising a child in Singapore would be about $600,000 or $900,000 when he included the state subsidies for education.
I don't think that Singaporean parents really know how much it costs. But the perception that it costs a lot is fueled by many factors. Of course, the private insurers and others who have projected estimates. So every parent expects that when they have a child, they would want to give of their best. So the question then is, how much is best? I think that's the yardstick that keeps shifting. And that makes it difficult because you can't plan long term if the yardstick keeps shifting, right? So it makes you very nervous, especially if you want to be a responsible parent.
The government has been trying to do its bit to bring down the opportunity costs and the monetary costs of raising a child in Singapore. Mandated maternity leave, a bigger baby bonus, childcare subsidies, the use of Medisave to pay for pre-delivery and delivery, and even paternity leave. All this to the tune of about 2 billion Singapore dollars a year from 2013. That's up from the $1.6 billion a year package of 2008. The question is, how far will the bigger budget go towards turning our TFR around?
I always argue that our policies are much appreciated by the converts, meaning those who have already decided that they're going to have kids and they're going to grow more children. Our policies, I believe at this point, are not able to convince those who are just sitting at the fence, and just worrying, will this work, will this work?
But what if it's not about the money? What if people, not just Singaporeans, are not having kids simply because they're happier without? Seems reasonable, but does that sound odd to you?
Using data from Europe and the United States, numerous scholars have found that parents report lower levels of happiness, life satisfaction, marital satisfaction, and mental well-being than adults without children. And these studies aren't new. They've been around since the 1980s. So researchers have agreed for a while now that there is zero or even negative association between having children and happiness.
So why does the belief that children equals joy persist? Because when people think of children, this is what they see in their heads.
That first smile, the first word, the goodnight hug. They don't focus on the diaper changes, the constant whinging, the loss of uninterrupted sleep. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls this the focusing illusion. We focus on the moment, overestimating the importance of certain things in bringing about our future happiness.
Right. So while the joy of seeing your child graduate is something big and meaningful, it doesn't make up for the constant, everyday dips in well-being caused by the banalities of child raising.
Well, the notion of happiness is a very elusive one to measure. It's a social construct that has so many multiple dimensions that, most indicators lack validity and reliability. But that much said, I think that based on the studies that I have done, certainly for those who are parents, much of, there's a lot of positive affirmation for their roles as parents and appreciation of the parenthood experience. So I think that while I believe that parents derive a lot of satisfaction from growing children, nonetheless, I acknowledge that there are stresses to parenting in modern Singapore, as in other cities in the world. So question then is, how can we make it easier? So how can we alleviate the perceived stress for children?
So that part we're still working on. The bottom line is this: if we want more Singaporean babies, we have to ensure women don't have to choose between career and children. Now, this isn't just about more goodies from the government. It's about ensuring greater gender equity at work and at home. And on that note, we've come to the end of this season of 8 Figures. We hope you found these numbers as illuminating as we have. We'll be back next time to discuss and demystify the numbers that matter.